My name is Helen McGonigal. I'm an attorney from Connecticut. I grew up in the Diocese of Providence, Rhode Island, where I was also victimized by Father Brendan Smith, an Irish cleric who his case actually brought down the government in Ireland. It's a case well known in Ireland, but for a period of time he was in the States, in Rhode Island, in North Dakota. I thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming and bearing witness. My name is Walter Robinson. I spent 34 years at the Boston Globe, and I now work 100 yards away at Northeastern University, where I teach investigative reporting to college students.
Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Mitchell Garaviti, attorney. I'd like to thank John and Susan for doing this compelling film and for all the survivors being here tonight.
My name is Bob Hotzen. For 23 years, I was an Irish Christian brother. In fact, David Carney, whom you saw in the film, he was in my freshman homeroom at Catholic Memorial in 1981 when he was being abused by Monsignor Frederick Ryan. I went to the headmaster that same year and told him that I thought Father Ryan was creepy, was hanging around the football team, and something should be done. And they told me he was a wonderful, wonderful priest, and I should really keep my mouth shut. I left the Christian Brothers, became a priest in the Archdiocese of Newark, and because of retaliation, harassment, etc., I left the priesthood in 2011. Thank you, John and Susan, for this magnificent project.
I'm Alexa McPherson. I'm a survivor. The priest, unfortunately for me, is still considered a priest, Father Peter Canchong, and even though he is not technically defrocked because he needs to be defrocked from Thailand, where he came from, he instead resides in the Boston area and became a nurse.
I'm Paul Killen. I'm a member of an organization called Speak Truth to Power. It was formed shortly after the revelations in the Boston Globe. And we have maintained a vigil in front of the cathedral every week for the last 11 and a half years. For two reasons. Number one, we want to recognize the courage of the survivors who came forward. We believe that they have already changed the culture in this country and continue to do so. And secondly, we need to keep their faces in front of the community because the leadership in our church is still failing to address this problem in an adequate way.
My name is Bruce Teague. I'm a Roman Catholic priest and a survivor of clergy sexual abuse. And in those both capacities, I found it necessary in my life to be a witness to the horrific pain of so many people and to remain within the institution bearing witness to that pain.
Okay, so you know the panel now, and we'd love to invite your questions, your responses to the film, and we have the participants in the film, and Bruce is also in the next film that we're doing on those who have a conscience who are reporting clerical abuse. So I open it up to some of your questions.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. I have a question about mishandling of the situations in general of the hierarchy. My question is, why was it mishandled? Was it a matter of, let's call it politics or policy? Was it malice? Or was it a mix of those particular things that made seeking justice just so difficult and nearly impossible? Thank you.
I think you have As I said earlier in the film, one of the most powerful institutions in the world, if not the most powerful institution in the world. And they had this built-in secrecy. Canon law said these matters, sexual abuse matters, when looked into, shall be kept secret. The pedophile would tell the child to keep the matter a secret, and the supervisors would tell people who reported the abuse, keep it a secret. So you have this entity that's revered, it hides behind the veil of religion in terms of the supervisors and the pedophiles, and they're using their power and influence with their rules of secrecy to allow children to be sexually molested in a wholesale fashion.
Just to add to what Mitchell had to say, I don't think that there's any other religion in the world like the Catholic Church. It's an absolute monarchy, and it's a worldwide institution that is, as he said, incredibly powerful. It has its own set of laws that the average Catholic in the church pew, and certainly a child that's being victimized, has no idea that there's a whole set of laws separate and apart from secular law and civil laws, and that those laws and those directives that are issued by the Vatican are what control the institution. And those directives, right in black and white, said secrecy, and we're going to have secret archives, and we're going to have canons and laws that are designed to protect that. The average person that's non-Catholic, and many Catholics in the church pews themselves, were unaware that there was an ecclesiastical system, a whole tribunal and system of courts. I mean, certainly a child that was abused didn't know that this existed. So there was a whole infrastructure that supported the secrecy. And it's a whole institution and infrastructure that allowed the secrecy to stay in place and to continue to stay in place today. Many of the records are still under seal. They have not been revealed to the public eye. And they sit in Rome because that was the directive. The directive was to send sensitive files to Rome. So if Mitchell served a subpoena on, the Archdiocese of Boston, they could turn around and say, the file's not here, it's in Rome.
Okay, another question? Another response?
I'd like to add to that in a second. I'd like Walter Robinson from the Boston Globe to address this in terms of how the Boston Globe went to court and had the records released. That is something I could not do as plaintiff's attorney because I didn't have the power under the First Amendment that the press would have.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. One thing on that issue, of my memory, this was 10 years ago, but there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents just in this archdiocese that became public that made it clear in case after case that the church, the cardinal and the archbishop, the bishops decided to keep this secret because of the reputation of the church. That was the paramount impetus, and it was almost as if the children didn't matter. On the issue that Mitch raised, we got a new editor in 2001, and his first day he called our attorney and said we'd like to file a motion in all of the cases that Mitch Caribbean had filed. The court had put all of the discovery made by the archdiocese, Father Gagan's records, under seal. And the Globe went to court and filed a motion asking that those records be unsealed. And I think our attorney felt that we didn't have much of a chance at the outset. We felt, and I think the argument was that it's in the public interest. And then we drew a judge, Constance Sweeney, who had 16 years of Catholic education, and we said, oh my God. And in fact, she ruled that the records should be public. And everything became public in the Gagan case, and then, as you may remember, many people came forward and other lawsuits were filed, and there were 3 or 4 judges who were issuing different rulings, and the chief judge of the Superior Court, Suzanne Del Vecchio, said, wait a minute, all of these cases should go to Judge Sweeney. And as soon as she made that decision, the die was cast because Judge Sweeney had already ruled that the public had a right to these records. So in every single case, when the church turned over the documents became public. And I think I got the
Bruce.
I just want to add that sometimes there's a nature of closed institutions who contain secrecy, and we're looking at the military records, and particularly the rape of women during wartime circumstances, and how difficult and intractable that has gone on for 20 or 30 years since Patricia Schroeder, the congresswoman from Colorado, tried to do that. Most institutions, and I'm not forgiving the Catholic Church for this, I'm saying they're risk adverse and they're scandal averse. And what was, I think, predominant on the minds of many of these people was to avoid scandal at all costs, even though it meant terribly the sacrifice of our children, which was horrific. And this is where power dynamics enter in. And I think, was it Ray Helmick was talking about accountability in the Catholic Church. And this is the issue in terms as we move towards the future. How do we hold the institution accountable for a degree of transparency? How do we hold people in power accountable for their actions and behaviors, as we do with military officers now who fail to protect their troops, as to Marine Corps generals who are removed from office, as how do we protect all people in every single institution of our life, especially the Catholic Church, which holds itself as a moral authority. How do we protect people? How do we hold people accountable? And the judicial process is one way of doing it, but I think more needs to be done.
I just wanted to make one comment, maybe to give some historic perspective. You use the word malice. Do we detect, do we find malice in the actions of these people? And I think in the ordinary sense of that word, we probably don't. What happens is we find an almost total indifference to the well-being of children. And I'm reminded that Hannah Arendt covered the Eichmann trial in the 1960s in Jerusalem. Eichmann had been a pivotal person in the extermination of millions of Jews. And she wrote a book which was titled Eichmann in Jerusalem, and she subtitled the book, A Report on the Banality of Evil. And it has raised a lot of controversy from people because they didn't like the word banality. But if you read the book and read what she has to say, she is impressed with the fact that when bystanders turn their heads and look the other way, and she's talking about bystanders at every level, from the people who are on top and they're making decisions, to the people who are watching these decisions, to the people who are watching the effects of these decisions, and they decide that they don't want to become involved. And her point is that without malice, great evil can be done if you are indifferent to what is going on.
And just another level of your question, an anecdote. I was preparing for ordination at the age of 45. Another seminarian had asked me to teach him how to play golf while I was in the seminary because he had heard that I was fairly proficient in it as a young man, etc. So I said, sure. Well, when it came time for us to be called to ordination, he said to me, Bob, I'm very sorry, but we're probably not going to be able to be friends anymore. Because once I'm ordained, I'm going to be ontologically changed. I laughed at it. I said, what the hell does that mean? That's another aspect of this, the layers of not only malice, not only incompetence, but clergy believe they're in a different realm, and they're trained to be separate from the rest of reality, which, of course, we call it mental illness. When people are separated from reality, they're in a different time zone, so to speak. So that was a real awakening for me, because that man, once those oils went on, he couldn't be friends with another human being anymore, because he was ontologically changed. He was now in God's realm, he thought. That's the same man who said to me, very close to ordination, Bob, if you want to be my friend, you're going to have to be my bitch. And when I reported that to the bishop after he was appointed the director of a house for young men discerning vocations, the bishop ignored me. You see what happens?
Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for being here today. This was touched on a bit in the film, but I was just curious how this has affected your faith on a more personal level. And if you guys don't want to talk about that at all, I completely understand. I was just curious.
For me personally, I don't have any. I don't go to the church anymore. I actually have my kids in First Communion classes right now, more because for my mom, since she raised 8 of us Catholic and was fairly devout and everything and still goes to church, but I can't do it. And I'm actually struggling right now with trying to figure out how they're going to go to Mass, because I know I sure as hell ain't going to take them. So if it'll be my mom or whatever, but the priest in the parish is actually aware of my abuse situation and said something to my mom the other day about my kids having to come, and I just looked at her and said, they're just not going to go. Like, if you don't take them, I won't be able to do it. I have all I can do to even drive by one, much less be in a church or anywhere near that for my life. So I believe in like goodness in people and bad, and what goes around comes around for karma. But as for any kind of relationship with the church, I'm done.
My faith has never been stronger, but my religion has never been weaker. Hallelujah.
Growing up, I was taught there was good and evil, and this was evil. And it didn't matter that the evil was within the church. It was evil. It wasn't any more complicated than that. It wasn't a mistake. It was done intentionally. It's been done for centuries, and it's still continuing. And you have an evil. It wasn't any more complicated. What I am surprised at in learning about the Catholic faith, I'm not Catholic, is how they're taught that if you don't do this, you'll be punished. If you do that, you'll be punished. And if you say this, you'll be punished. If you don't say that, you'll be punished. It's a punishment all the time. It took me a while to get my hands around that, but that's how they controlled the secrecy. The priest would tell the child, if you tell anybody, you'll be punished because your mother's going to burn in hell. And they really believed that. But they were children. They had to believe that. But it was simply evil. It's not any more complicated than that. In every religion, I believe people believe there's good and bad. Well, this was bad.
Well, I was a little up on the Catholic Church this morning when I read an op-ed piece in the New York Times by a correspondent for the Rome Daily. The lead anecdote of which was about the new Pope coming out of his somewhat Spartan quarters and seeing a bishop waiting for his car and driver. And he said to the bishop, "Why don't you walk?" So this morning I was filling up my own faith. I have faith in God. I have none in the Catholic Church. I am uncomfortable going into Catholic Church, and funerals and weddings, and that's it for me.
I don't go to church, and I haven't for years. I have not raised my daughter in the church. I consider, the aspect of spirituality and faith separate and apart from the institution of any religion. So I don't really buy into any institutionalized religion. And I certainly don't think that there needs to be a middleman between me and God. If I have to have a discussion with God, then I'll have a discussion with God on my own. And so that's where I'm at. And, I've been able to raise a child outside of the church without a problem. To me, what I'm up against is a culture, not a religion, because that's what the Catholic Church is to me. It's a culture. My parents were cradle to grave Catholics, and so were my grandparents, and I come from an ancestry of priests and nuns and mother superiors and so forth. And, it took me a long time to realize, hey, this isn't a religion, it's a culture. That's what it is. And I'm not going to buy into it. So.
I loved what Helen said in the film, that the victims are the church. The victims have saved the church. They have saved it, because this problem was there. This epidemic of child sexual abuse was there. But it was the survivors speaking out that made it happen. Without the survivors, Mitchell wouldn't have had the case, and Walter wouldn't have been able to get to the documents and do that coverage, and the rest of us wouldn't be here either. So that's why I love this film, because it's mostly the survivors telling their truth, and that's what's so transformative. To answer your lovely question, I've never, in a weird way, I feel more Catholic than ever, just because I've been studying the church so intently for the last 10 years in a way I never anticipated. But I also, to change the subject a little bit, I want to pick up on something Walter said about reading about the new Pope. He is amazing everybody. He's a totally new, and some people are starting to say the word revolutionary figure. And I certainly, my daughter, my 28-year-old daughter called me and said, Mom, I'm kind of soft on this guy. A gay friend of mine has gone back to Mass. I mean, something is in the air with this man. I do, since I do the skunk at the garden party all the time, I'm going to do it right now, which is to say, we've been really studying his record in Argentina, and there is nothing there to suggest that he was any different on the subject of clergy sexual abuse. In fact, a priest just went to jail last week, a convicted abuser. He was convicted 4 years ago, and the reason he stayed out of jail for so long was that Cardinal Bergoglio, the Pope, was circulating a secret study to the Supreme Court judges trying to discredit the victims. So I don't know how this is going to play out. None of us do, right? I mean, this Pope could end up doing the right thing. But somebody has to do a critical examination of what he did and didn't do in Argentina. And it's going to be fascinating to see if he truly is a man of candor, and he's reached out to every marginalized group except the victims of clergy sexual abuse.
And I just wanted to add that years ago, one of the first films that John and I worked on was with the Jews and Catholics in the Holocaust. And the title was going to be Faith in the Holocaust. And after a number of interviews, we realized that everyone kept saying we lost our faith during the Holocaust. And one of the women we interviewed, a survivor from many, many camps, Sonia Weitz, who has since died, a powerful poet, a wonderful woman, said something that I have used for many years, and I use it with my students, and I live by it. And she said, going back to what you were saying about the bystander, Paul, that there is no such thing as an innocent bystander. If you choose to be a bystander, you are no longer innocent. And the poem that she spoke often of, because people would say, well, do you believe in God and how you may continue to be following your faith? And she said there's a big difference, because she could forgive people who had made the wrong choices, those who worked in the camps, but she could not forgive the people who looked the other way. And she said it wasn't so much that she was asking where was God, but where was man instead. And I think when we started to do this film, it was clear to us that usually you have a narration, but we thought that the survivors' stories were so powerful that a narration would have blocked their chance to speak, and having been silenced for much too long and for too many years, the focus had to be on their telling of their stories and their narrative, and to show them the respect that they were denied for too many years. Last point on that is we've heard from friends who are Catholic, and we both teach at Boston College where they are Catholic, and students who have said, well, you know, it's not right to say bad things about the church. But as you see, we have members of the religious community, we have priests involved in the stories, we have people who still go to church, and I think that's the part that complicates our lives. We want to think either it's all good or all bad. You know, you throw the baby out with the wash, and it's either everyone is wonderful or everyone is awful. And in fact, life is complicated. And I think that we owe all of these people an incredible amount of thanks. And I forgot to mention earlier, Gotham Chopra, who was our editor and one of our he did all the filming along with Bob Heim and John Hoover, but Gotham and I spent hours that last few weeks pulling together. We could have made a story out of each one of these people's lives, their responses, the powerful substance of what they said, and it was really difficult to sort, and so I meant to thank Gotham earlier, as did John, so thank you. Do you have another question?
Hi, my name's Jeff Thomas. I'm Helen's co-survivor down in Rhode Island, and we were both abused by Brendan Smith, and who pretty much wiped out our neighborhood. Helen and I have shortly learned that there's another 4 or 5 kids in our neighborhood that have the same problem as we. And what continues to puzzle me about all of this, having been a survivor and continue to be, is I have with me affidavits from a court in Ireland that would have put Pope John Paul behind bars a long time ago, had he been a normal human being, had he been a man that went to work for a living and so forth. But I don't know where to go, and I have these affidavits with me. I don't know where to go with them, because nobody will do anything about it. They're completely powerless. They go back to 1948. I was abused in 1968. That's 20 years. Cardinal Brady just lost his job because of him. Cardinal Brady was on 60 Minutes, 3 months ago, Helen? With our abusive priest in the backdrop, and they don't mention his name once. You know why they didn't mention his name once? Because he's the worst of the worst. They keep it hidden from even the press. I've had private eyes try to write me off the road to intimidate me off my lawsuit. She has been ridden off the road with my daughter for the same reason. I don't know where to go with this anymore, guys. I don't know what to do. I've gotten mad. I've done a documentary with Helen. It seems that America will swallow this to a point. And when it gets to that threshold, they can't handle the pain anymore, so they leave us with what's left of the rest. And we don't know where to go with it. I want to do the right thing. If you punch me in the mouth, I'm going to punch you back. But I don't know who to punch. I mean, it just sits there, and it's like being numb and not knowing what to do with the rest of this story.
Especially
because
he's going to be canonized, right?
Yeah. So here I am with documents that can put the man in jail. And I'm hearing across the pond, they're going to make him a saint. Talk about a conflict. I don't know what to do, but I do appreciate all of you coming and putting the effort in for tonight, because it's an unbelievable battle that we all face, and it's not going to go away tomorrow. I just don't know where to go with it anymore. I just keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's why we're doing a follow-up.
Yeah. One thing I've learned through the years, I've represented 149 victims of Father Gagan alone, is they're more afraid of you than you are of them. They're terrified of you. These supervisors, these manipulators of evil, these pedophiles are afraid of the survivors. They're terrified of you. Why? Because you cost them money. That's the language they understand. They understand money and power. The religion is just a vehicle to get money and power, to obtain money and power. How else can you explain this? You have to do what helps you heal. whatever it is. If it's therapy, if it's being public, if it's keeping the fight going, if it's joining with Helen and keeping the fight going, whatever helps you heal, figure out what helps you heal. You win, they lose. They're terrified of you. To this day, children are still being sexually molested. They're not stopping. I just settled on 24 cases in Haiti. Most of those children, more than 20 of those children, were molested after they put their new norms in place in 2002. Many of those children were molested in 2006, 2007, 2008 in Jesuit camp. And more than 40 children have called me to claim to have been sexually molested by that same perpetrator who got 20 years in prison. He pled guilty, he got 20 years. And they were all molested within, I'd say, easily within the past 10 years. It hasn't stopped. They're terrified of you. I'm sorry to go on here, but you're costing them money, and that's why they're terrified.
I think Paul Kellen has his secret in the not secret, but his statement in the movie. He went from the sanctuary to the sidewalk, and that's where I have found the most life too. You know, this weekend we're going to do another demonstration in Waltham tomorrow night, Sunday morning. It may be 3 of us, it may be 2 of us, it may be 5 of us. But every time we do it, we find a new survivor, and that's what keeps me going. It's the person who says, I saw your picture in the Globe, or I saw this in the Herald, or I saw this on the TV, and it happened to me too. And then we go back to the people who are refusing to help the one person that we went for, and we say to them, oh, okay, now we have 2 victims. You're going to tell them they're not believable now? So we're like, I guess, like the fingernails on the chalkboard. And they're hearing that, and they don't like hearing that. And that's where I find the most life for myself anyway, as an advocate now.
Bob, when and where is your
Sacred Heart Church in Waltham, 311 River Street. 3 o'clock on Saturday before the 4 o'clock Mass and after the 4 o'clock Mass. So we'll be there between like 3 and 5. And then Sunday morning, 7 until about 11, because there's 2 Masses, 7:30 and 10.
And what's the case?
72-year-old man named Sam Noah, abused by a stigmatine father, Thomas Henry. And the stigmatine religious congregation has told him to take a hike. They told him that the priest was a wonderful man and he would never do such a thing. This man is 72 years old. It happened when he was 14. He's been living with it ever since. So he's taken his story to the sidewalk. And I can't tell you the amount of success we've been getting from the sidewalk.
So a question over there?
Yes, right here.
Thank you for sharing your story and actually coming here and really personalizing your story of your advocacy work. So my question really is, we talked about the institution and the culture, and for advocacy, I was surprised to hear, Alexa, in one of your stories about your family finding out immediately, or your mother, and taking action. Not in the way that perhaps you would hope things would turn out, but I'm wondering, in the work of making of this film and in your advocacy and in all the cases you've been involved with, how often do you find that parents were the ones that said, he's a priest, this is the church, and had them look away and not be an advocate? I almost think that Alexa might be an exception of somebody who...
No.
No?
No.
That the parents mostly did come
I'll
forward?
tell you. I'll tell you. She did.
Unfortunately, my story is not the exception. So even though I was abused for more than 6 years of my young life, when my dad walked in and caught him trying to rape me, the police were initially called. But my mother, being extremely Catholic and devout, wanted it as quiet as the church did. And my father wanted to push it, but went along with my mother. The detectives questioned me again and again and again. Was this the only time? I lied. I said yes. It wasn't until I was just over 18 when my brother John was living in Canada and he called me and said, I can't live with this anymore. He had attempted suicide several times. 2 of my brothers were also molested and raped. But there's a 7-year age gap in between us. So being that young and them being teenagers, they got away quickly. And then the focus turned completely to me. So my parents never knew about my brothers. They never knew about my other abuse. Nothing. He actually drove down from Prince Edward Island, 14-hour drive. We went to the DA's office back in '93, and I've been fighting since '93 to get this animal prosecuted in a criminal court. And I run into statute of limitations problems, and part of it was my parents' fault, because if my parents never actually questioned me, the police questioned me. I think if my mother and father, especially my mother, if they had pushed me, I probably would have broken and said, it's been going on for years. But I didn't feel safe. All I heard was the lies of, they're not going to love you, you're going to go to hell, you're going to burn this, we're going to kill your cats, I'm going to have your brother John taken away. He was a drug addict, attempted suicide, hung himself. I found him in the closet. Carbon monoxide poisoning with the blocking his thing in the car. What the hell is it called? The muffler in his car. All different kinds of things. So it wasn't an exception for me. It was an exception that the police were called initially, but the church did want it blocked. He got probation for 1 year. The records, Mitchell and I have gone to the courthouse. Luckily, I still happen to have a couple of documents, but they're conveniently gone when Mitchell and I went to Dorchester District Court. And instead, he had to go and get what they considered a normal job and went and became a nurse. And so for me, it's not an exception. My parents stand behind me now, but my mother still cringes to this day and doesn't want to talk about it, hates seeing me on the news, hates seeing me at things with Mitchell, will support me, but deep inside, she still goes to church and tries to throw it down my throat, and I'm like, I'm done, leave me alone. But yeah, she didn't find out about everything until after my brother and I went to the DA's office, and then I think she almost had a heart attack. And she was actually really angry that we all knew about each other and kept it quiet from her and my dad. So I don't know if she's forgiven us yet, but I don't care. I did what I needed to do for me at the time. So the people that come out and say, oh, you jumped on the bandwagon, you did it for the money. Go back and look at my records, you'll see, 93, I still have the papers. I went to the DA's office, I didn't go to Mitchell. I went to Mitchell as a last resort for money because, as Mitchell said, that's what hits them, that's what breaks them.
And maybe Walter could speak a bit also, thank you, Alexa. When you interviewed families, when you doing research for the story?
Well, I think it's true from the number of victims. I believe we interviewed about 300 victims in just in this archdiocese, and most commonly they didn't tell their parents, and sometimes when they did, the parents blocked. And I remember one story I'll never forget. I wish I could remember the name of the priest. It was St. Gerard Magella Church in Canton. And a young man called me, lived in California, and his father was dying and was trying to come to terms with how he had handled what had happened to his son. And so I went to see the father, and what had happened is the son was working in the rectory. He had been abused, and he told his parents. And they were both devout Catholics. And so his father went and confronted the priest. And the priest said, I'm getting help, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And he was satisfied, he took that. And then only discovered later that the priest went on to abuse several other boys in the parish. And I believe went on to Sacred Heart, was at Sacred Heart Parish in Waltham at some point as well. And you must remember the name. It was Peter somebody or other. But I wish remember the name, but Peter Frost. Thank you very much. And you know, there was a family in Plymouth where 3 boys, 14, they were 2 years apart. The 3 boys were abused in the same family by a priest who was a guest in their home all the time. And it wasn't until 2002 that one of the boys went to his brother and said, the youngest, went to his older brother and said, I was abused by father. And then the middle son said, well, I was too. And then they went to the older brother and he was too. And the family was devastated. But the kids never told one another, much less their parents. And, that's I think now, I hope now, kids are more apt to tell their parents, and the parents now are more likely to be skeptical of this institution. But I don't know that.
Thank you. I can speak from personal experience and also from speaking with other victims. It's been on the rare occasion that I've heard another victim tell me that when they reported to their parent, I can only think of one person, that parent slapped them in the face. For the most part, the victims weren't telling their parents. And in my personal situation, my age of abuse and age of development was young. You know, I was abused by Father Brendan Smith starting at age 6. So the years were age 6, 7, and 8. And then by age 12, I moved out of Rhode Island and I was taken out of the environment and the stimuli that might have kept this in my consciousness through the years. So I blocked it out. I blocked the abuse out. So when the information started coming back to me in 2005, it came back after my mom was deceased. My mom had passed in 2002. But through other family members, through talking to Jeff Thomas, my neighbor, I know my mom reacted appropriately, and I did remember telling her when I was sick and home, sick from school in the 1st grade under doctor's orders not to go to school for a week, and Smith had come to my house to visit me and to check up on me, that first of all I was terrified. I hid under the bed, and as soon as I heard his voice downstairs, and my mom asked me afterwards, after he left, why, you know, what was going on. And I told her, you know, he was, in so many words, I didn't use the word molestation, but he was touching me, he was touching my private parts. And she looked horrified, and I don't know what she did to act on it at that point, but the year was 1968, and I do know in 1968 that was the year Smith was removed from our parish, sent back to Ireland, and sent to a mental hospital for treatment, only to be allowed back in 1969. And then when he was allowed back in 1969, I learned later in life as an adult in 2007 when I connected with Jeff Thomas, who was my childhood neighbor, that my mom caught Smith in the act with Jeff, had taken him behind the stone wall. You know, our houses were right next door to each other. And when Jeff didn't want to tell me the story at first, he didn't know how I would react. In fact, he didn't tell me it directly. A family member told me first, and then Jeff confirmed it. Because I did, you know, he didn't know that, you know, how I would react if my mom knew, you know, my mom knew. So my mom evidently saw it when running out of the house to confront Brendan Smith. And Smith said to her, charged up to her, and he told Jeff to go back into his house. Get out of here, this is church business. And I know my mom well enough, you know, she was my mom, but she wasn't the kind of person not to go to a bishop. She wouldn't have been silent. But the scenario that plays out over and over again in these cases, and if I had my file, I'd know more, is that had she gone to the bishop, she would have been sworn to secrecy, because that's what they did to the family members and to the victims. They swore the parents, the victims, the witnesses to secrecy under a papal directive that was issued in 1962 that said these crimes of solicitation and child molestation, were to be kept secret. So my mom would have been put in the position of being sworn to secrecy under penalty of excommunication. And we knew this took place later on as it came out in the news with other Father Brendan Smith cases in Ireland. So I like to think my mom's, passed over to the other side, that she did everything she could in her power. And then that's 1969 when she caught Smith with Jeff. By 1970, she was becoming mentally unstable and she was thrown into a mental hospital because Smith, I believe, my brother believes, that Smith attacked her and went after her and punished her for reporting him. So. Okay.
I've had countless number of cases where children have told their parents, or their mother actually, too afraid to tell their father, and the mother would slap the child in the face, say, "Don't you ever talk about a priest like that." And I've had countless number of cases where a child's been afraid to tell anybody. And a number of children, a number of victims didn't tell their father because they were afraid their father would just kill the priest. They were just terrified. So to me, it goes both ways. I see it, I hear it all the time. I was never familiar with the concept of being a cradle Catholic until I got involved in this area. And to me, that's a person who puts their faith before the family. And that's what cradle Catholics are taught. And if a child told his mom, who was a cradle Catholic, he just got slapped in the face. And that was a re-victimization for the child. It drove the child further into isolation and further destroyed the child's self-esteem.
We have time probably for another question or so. Would anyone else? Or anyone here? Please, call me. There's one up there.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing and being so open with such vulnerability and such stories. One thing that's really struck me is kind of the idea of how community has really helped survivors process their emotions and make sense of what's happening. So I'm curious what's being done or what should be done to promote more awareness with people who are victims, and both children and adults, so that they can feel open in sharing what's happened to them and be able to process.
Thanks. Anyone like to, or who would like to? Go back and forth.
To me, it boils down to education. You have to teach children from a very young age to protect themselves, to report this abuse, to not be afraid to report the abuse, and to be taught that there isn't such a stigma to it. And I really think it begins with education. You really can't trust the institutions to take care of themselves, to watch themselves, to protect children, because that's not their primary interest. Their primary interest is money. I've said that earlier, and I'll say it again. It's just money and power. So it really boils down to education at a very young age and removing the stigma attached with being sexually molested.
So for me, I actually tell my kids all the time. I question them probably a little bit more than I should, but to let them know that it's okay to come to me. Some days they come to me with really silly stuff, oh my God, somebody was talking about me. They're 6 and 9. So, they come home from school or their after school program with some really silly things, but you know what? I'm glad that they feel comfortable enough to come to me with anything that's on their minds, because I feel like at least if they come to me with the silly stuff, then they'll come to me with the more serious stuff. And I feel like I have to be the best advocate for them. And those checks that are in place, like the Corey checks, those are only so good as long as somebody's been caught. So you have to keep things like that in mind and think kind of like the criminal and say, what am I going to do to not get caught and to ensure that I can keep abusing? And the only way you can stop the abuse is to instill in a child or a young teen that it's okay to come forward and speak and not be afraid.
I'm going to be a killjoy here. As an administrator of a parish for 3.5 years, I found that the most difficult thing that I've had is to educate people in terms of sexual abuse. Seriously, I went into a rectory. There was no boundaries. Everybody had keys to the rectory. Altar servers were alone with adults. Corey reports were done minimally. Only a handful of people who had contacts with children had Corey reports. I brought in the head of child protection from the Diocese of Springfield, and to give a training probably a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, and one of the people who was disruptive at the training was a deacon assigned to my parish at the time, who was also very bad in terms of boundaries. He'd walk into a confessional when I'd be hearing confessions. And so the most difficult part of the project is what was my friend Paul was saying, that about the bystander. This is an issue, child protection, which we cannot allow any bystanders. We're all in this process of protecting children. We're all responsible of creating safe environments where children can be protected, whether they be in a church or a school or whatever environment that they're in. And there are, Corey reports are limited, all this juridical stuff may be good and legal stuff may be good, but we're talking about creating a culture where our kids count and their dignity count. And even today, in the Massachusetts legislature, we're fighting to extend the statutes of limitations, and we're finding resistance and pushback on the part of legislatures. And we still are dealing with a numbskull, and I know he doesn't like to be called a numbskull. Flaherty was head of that committee, who dislikes the idea that child abuse is considered soul murder. Now, soul murder goes back to the Sigmund Freud term soul murder in terms of, and one of the survivors here, talked about so exquisitely the pain that he did not want anybody to touch him. He did not want to be around people. The type of corrosion to the soul that is done, that those of us who have survived have to fight against every day to reclaim our soul, we're still running into a pushback in terms of Massachusetts legislature right now. And we're talking about, if we can make smoking history in Massachusetts, why can't we make child abuse history?
Can I just jump in, Bruce? This is a perfect, there is, if you guys care enough to come out tonight, which is amazing to see this incredible film, to follow up on what Bruce said, and it's kind of very indirectly saying what can be done so that victims can tell their stories and children and adults can speak out. Here's what's happening. Victims will have access to the secular legal system if the statute of limitations is abolished. Other states have done it, and victims are empowered there, and predators are being taken off the streets. It hasn't happened here in Massachusetts because every time we try to do it, the Catholic lobby here, the bishops hire lobbyists to stop the bill from moving forward. They rely upon a Charlestown legislator named Eugene O'Flaherty, who is co-chair of the Judiciary Committee, and where this bill begins every single session. It's assigned to the Judiciary Committee. It cannot get out of committee because Representative O'Flaherty will not let it out of the committee. If it gets out of the committee, and if the Massachusetts legislature simply could debate it and vote on it, we think it could pass. But in any case, it deserves that kind of democratic process. What you could do is ask our speaker, Robert DeLeo, to please force Representative O'Flaherty to let that bill out of committee. If we don't, and believe it or not, if just the people in this room called, that would be an enormous impact. They don't get a lot of phone calls. His number is 617-722-2500. Yeah, it's 617-722-2500. And you just have to, it's House Bill 1455. I'm going to say this all again. And all you have to say is one sentence. You just give your name and address. It doesn't even matter that you're not a constituent of his, because he's, you know, for all of us, he runs our state, our House legislature. And let me just see here. Let's see. Sorry, all I said was, hi, you know, I gave my name. I'm calling to, and you just speak to an aide. You don't speak to him. I'm calling to ask Speaker DeLeo to urge the Judiciary Committee to report favorably on House Bill 1455, which would abolish the civil statute of limitations for child sex crimes. So I'm just going to say that all again. I really appreciate people taking notes, because you know, it's less than 5 minutes and you'll make a difference. At 617-722-1500. Let me just make sure of that. Did I say 2,500? I'm sorry. Let me just make sure of that. Sorry. I'm scrolling through my mail here.
Yeah, I think I have it.
Yeah, it's 617-722-2500. And it's House Bill 1455. I'm calling to ask Speaker DeLeo to urge the Judiciary Committee to report favorably on House Bill 1455, which would abolish the civil statute of limitations for child sex crimes.
And Paul, the persistence of our advocates and also survivors, because back in May, both Mitchell and Ann spoke about this at that time. So maybe, you know, third time's a charm.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. Personal viewpoint. Children have no ability to defend themselves against predators. You can institute all the programs you want. The predators are simply too smart. They'll get around it. They'll find a way to twist the programs, the no-touch programs and things like that. They find ways to twist those words to their own advantage. Where children just don't have the experience, they're not sophisticated enough. Their safety is totally in our hands. And we have a situation right now where, I mean, the Catholic Church, of course, is the premier example, but there are lots of other institutions that whenever they're told that there's a problem between one of their people and a child in their care, their instinct is to close ranks and hide the problem, and to not deal with it and not make it public and not have criminal or public authority aware of what's happening. And that situation is starting to change, and it changes because of the courage of the survivors who come forward. I think the actions of the trustees at Penn State in not allowing Joe Paterno to coach his last game is something that 10 years earlier would not have happened. About a month ago, on the cover of the Boston Globe magazine, there was a picture of a young man who 1 year earlier had anonymously come forward to the Deerfield Academy head of school and told her that he had been abused by a teacher. And what triggered him was that this man was continually lionized for his contributions to the school, and he was about to retire, and he was having things named after him, and he was in the school magazine, people were being told what a wonderful job he had done with his students. And this young man came forward and spoke to the head of school, and I think in an incredible way, she immediately called the Board of Trustees together. She did not call the lawyer for the school. She called the Board of Trustees. She got their support. She went personally to see this young man and talk to him and find out what the situation was. They then went and hired a private investigator. They got a report which said that it was very likely true what had been said. And I mean, she did an amazing job, because of course what has happened is now other students are coming forward. Predators don't have one victim. They have lots of victims. And Mitchell could probably comment on this better than I can, but my suspicion is that Deerfield Academy is now going to be exposed to a significant number of lawsuits. And I'm sure that the woman who was head of school knew that. She's not dumb. She didn't get to that position by being naive. But she understood what was at stake and what had to be done. And we're starting to see this happen. That young man at Deerfield Academy, in his own words, said that the reason that he was supported in his action was because of all of the stories of the survivors of clergy sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. He had just read those stories over and over again and eventually felt that, in fact, that he, having experienced the same treatment, had to do something. So children can't protect themselves. We have to do this. The institutional leaning is very poor. They go the wrong way. So we need laws that will encourage people who run organizations to believe that either a carrot or a stick. I would like to see them encouraged and also threatened personally. That if you're in charge of an organization, a sports team, the Boy Scouts, a girls club, any church organization, anybody who serves children, if you're in that position and become aware that somebody in your organization is doing the wrong thing, I like to think that you could be facing, let's say, how about a $50,000 fine or a $100,000 fine? I mean, I don't necessarily want to put these people in jail, but I want them to feel that there's a real threat. Because I think that I look at you people as the man in the street. That's how I look at myself. And we need to push to get the power in our society to be on the side of children. And with the actions of Representative O'Flaherty in the last 8 to 10 years, we can't even get the Massachusetts legislature to stand up for the safety of children. And if we don't go in that direction, children are not going to be able to protect themselves.
Thank you all. It's lights out at the museum time, so we thank you all. You've met the panelists most especially, and you've met our panelists. You know how to reach them. I think all of you, everyone has said, it's all of our responsibilities as well. So thanks to all of you. Thank you.
And we'll be showing the film again tomorrow at 3 and on Sunday at 1.